Let's stick with USC. We already mentioned Malachi. Are are you guys of the opinion that they're going to kick their recruiting into a different gear with Lincoln Riley out there?
I think so. I mean, I cannot recall ever hearing this much USC buzz in the Sunshine State. I mean, they are in on a number of different kids. Brandon Innis, the 5-star wide receiver that was previously committed to Oklahoma to play for Lincoln Riley. Someone told me, I don't know, like 6 months ago that, hey, Brandon's going to go wherever Lincoln Riley goes. And that was kind of when the rumors were out there that he might be changing positions. Well, he decommits from Oklahoma, was out at USC a couple weeks ago, just spent the weekend at Ohio State. So I don't think it's a done deal that he's a Trojan, but they might go, USC would go into South Florida, an area that they haven't recruited really at all in a while, and grab the top receiver right from Miami's backyard and right from a sweet spot for Alabama and Georgia. I mean, those two rosters, college football playoff rosters, have been built on kids from the 305 and the 954. So Innis is one of them. I mean, there's some other kids, DeJohn Johnson, a cornerback out of the Tampa area. He plays for former USC legend Mike Williams. That's his coach, and the Trojans are going to get an official visit there. And then one more prospect that has an interesting story, and me and Cooper are super high on him, is Lucas Simmons. He's originally from Sweden. Dad actually played at Oklahoma, moved overseas, I think for NFL Europe, really liked it in Sweden, stayed. And this is his son. He's 6'7", 300 pounds. I know Florida State's on him, but Florida State USC battle. So I do think USC, and we've seen it in Georgia as well, they are recruiting nationally. I think that's what Lincoln Riley wants to do. So it's going to be different, certainly different than what we've seen from the Trojans just with that brand. I think they're going to try to use that brand to their advantage.
Yeah, I think the credibility is back. Andrew mentioned Lucas Simmons, and I think that is really going to be the biggest question for USC in the future. How they move on is really going to be in the trenches on the offense, defensive side of the ball, and then at the linebacker position on defense as well. So Alex Grinch, I think that would be the biggest question. Can they get that solved up front? They're in a good spot for Josh Connerly, the #1 offensive tackle in 2022 from the state of Washington. You mentioned Lucas Simmons as well. If USC is really going to continue to elevate and try to bring themselves back to college football supremacy, that's where it's going to have to be. There's no doubt in my mind they can put together the best roster in terms of the skill position, especially offensively with Lincoln Riley. And we've seen that already. We're talking about Zachariah Branch, their #1 receiver in the country, Mekhi Lemon, I think the #3 receiver in the country. And then you got potentially Brandon Innis. There's nobody that's going to come close to that if that's exactly what USC ends up putting together. So in terms of what they can do from a skill position, I don't think there's going to be anybody in the country, maybe Ohio State. But really the question for me is what they get done in the trenches.
No doubt. I mean, to me, the formula for them is almost right of first refusal on any kid west of the Rockies. They're not going to win every single battle out there, but if you look at how Pete Carroll built it, it was if we wanted the kid on the West Coast, we pretty much got him, and then go national to fill the holes that maybe weren't available in that crop out west, because we know there just aren't as many big bodies, particularly on the defensive line out west. If you look and chart this, and I have a couple years ago, I'll probably update this, the number of 4-star or higher rated players who were 270 plus coming out of high school, it's declined year over year for about a decade. And it's a pretty steady decline. We see that with some of those families moving to Texas, some going to Las Vegas, which really you should still be able to cherry pick Las Vegas pretty well if you're SC. But Andrew, you're right. They really haven't recruited Florida hard in a while. I mean, like Leonard Williams, I guess, and then Aguilar would have been the two big guys I can remember going out there. But like Nelson has got to be a decade ago at least now.
Yeah, right? I was reading the old ESPN story. I mean, I know competitor, but it was the only thing I could find about this, and it was a while back. But speaking to your point, I was talking with a coach that recruits the state of Utah and had never really recruited Utah, and he told me, hey, there's all these big people there, but none of them want to leave. And we're talking a school west of the Mississippi, and he was telling me how Utah has just built these rosters. It's because all these kids want to stay home. They want to go to Utah. They want to go to BYU. So I do think that kind of speaks to what you're saying about the talent and the pool that's available on the West Coast. I also say this, our colleague Greg Biggins, there was a group of defensive linemen that went out to LA for a camp, and then they were from Georgia. And he's like, man, these guys are creatures. And I'm like, oh, that's just kind of the run of the mill here in Georgia. And he he's like, man, they don't have anything like this out there. So I do think there's definitely some truth to that. I know you got the data, but we see it certainly for sure out on the camp and 7-on-7 circuit.
You did mention USC as well. Let's kind of bounce back there potentially with the announcement coming on Friday of 5-star offensive tackle Josh Connerly. And I bring him up because he's kind of the last big fish in the class of 2022, right? I don't think anybody else that is that highly rated is unsigned.
Yeah, till they're in the portal.
Yeah, exactly. What do you guys think about Connerly?
He's a great player. I mean, I'll speak on behalf of Chris Singletary and Gabe Brooks, two other national recruiting analysts here. They absolutely love him. I got to see him in my time in the Pacific Northwest with Washington and Oregon. I mean, he's hard to come by. Like you said, we talked about the premium on big bodies. On the West Coast, you're talking about a guy 6'5", 285 pounds. He's got 34.5-inch arms. He's got huge hands. I think almost 11-inch hands, 10 3/4. So he had a really good week in San Antonio at the Adidas All-American Bowl. And he's a two-way player. He's a two-sport athlete, plays basketball. You see that skill set kind of translate onto the football field. He's got cat-like reflexes. He's super light on his feet. He's quick twitch, explosive. He finishes blocks. So he's the premier offensive lineman, not only in the country at the offensive tackle position, but on the West Coast. That's a huge get, whether it be one of these schools at USC, Oregon, Washington, Michigan, all four of those schools in it. But if he does end up going to a place like USC, like you mentioned, the importance of not only getting a really good player, but I think the message that sends to the West Coast, to offensive linemen on the West Coast, that's big. And if USC can get their mitts on those guys, there's only 3 or 4 of those guys every cycle. And what happens is, and this is the way we used to think when it was at UW or Oregon, if you can get your hands on the top 3 or 4 offensive linemen, that's addition by subtraction for everybody else. Not only are you getting those players, that hurts everybody else in the Pac-12 because USC is the only school, maybe outside of Oregon, in that footprint that can go national. So that's a big deal for USC if Connerly does end up picking Los Angeles and Lincoln Riley.